Hi class, my name is Chastity Collins and today I will be doing my discussion on Chapter 8, Causes and Reasons in the book about behaviorism. So here's just a list of key elements that the book discusses. So these are just the main things. And today I will be talking about verbal practices, folklores, maxims, and proverbs, governmental and religious laws, the laws of science, contingency-shaped versus rule-governed behaviors, and reasoning. So the book starts out by listing verbal practices, which the three were commands, advice, and warning. So the book described commands as to give orders. An example would be to move over, and this is commanding the listener to move or else. Another example is watch out, and this describes an act, and it makes implication of a consequence occurring. So, for move over, the speaker tells the listener what he is to do, and in some cases it also gives a list of aversive consequences, which this differs from warnings in the sense that aversive commands are not in order. And watch out, which I said describes an act. This could be, for example, whenever you may tell someone to watch out from danger. An example would be like, hey, watch out for that rock before you stumble, or watch out, you may fall in the lake. Another verbal practice is advice. The definition of advice would be to describe behavior, and it implies positive reinforcing consequences. So the book gave its own examples, but I used mine just so I wouldn't, copy word for word or verbatim. So the example that I used was go south, young lady, or another example of advice would be you will have good luck. In advice, when given advice, a person heeds warnings and takes the advice depending on what has happened in similar circumstances in the past. So moving on to directions and instructions. So with directions, the speaker gives listener directions by noting a reinforcing consequence. So an example of that would be whenever you give directions on how to get to a certain place, such as, for example, if you want to tell someone how to get to Detroit and they're in another near city near Michigan, you would say take Route 87 and take an exit off the intersection at Route 93, then turn left onto Route 98. And what instructions are, how they differ from directions, is that they make further direction unnecessary. So this could be a speaker teaching the listener how to drive for the first time, and they can give different verbal prompts such as starting, stopping, when to turn a signal, or any other command that the speaker may give the listener to do. And by following instructions, the listener can avoid potential dangers, and we know this can be something as getting into a car accident. The book also spoke about folklore, maxims, and proverbs. So what folklore, maxims, and proverbs do is that they help strengthen behaviors which make them effective. So folklore, they come in different forms of instruction, and they can be passed down from generation to generation, which I will give an example of later in this presentation of a folklore which gives instruction. And like, as I said, it's something that can be passed down and used generations to generations, which proves to be effective. And because they're passed down, they can gain permanency in the culture. And this makes it easy to teach a particular thing. An example of a maxim, I got this straight from the book. A maxim would be to lose a friend, lend him money. My interpretation of this was, if you want to lose a friend, lend him money. I also interpreted that it's possible to lose a friend because they potentially may not pay you back. So to lose a friend, lend him money. And the behavior in this maxim is lending money, and the consequence in this maxim is losing a friend. Governmental and religious laws. So when people began living in groups, they began to partake in practices which were injurious or detrimental to others, and they were punished by the person whom they injured retaliating. So, an example of a religious law would be, we all know the 10 Commandments. Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not covet, so on and so forth. So a person may start out by obeying the commandment, which is thou shalt not kill, but they may refrain from killing a person to avoid imprisonment or capital punishment. So they may start out by obeying the commandment, but then it turns into them obeying the commandment to not suffer repercussions. The laws of science. So, upon learning the laws of science, a person is able to behave under the contingencies of a complex world more effectively. So, an example that I used was a farmer plowing soil, but actually Skinner, he used this example in his book, but he used the term, what was it, spading soil. So I don't know if you guys noticed, or maybe it was just in this chapter that I reviewed, he uses very antiquated terms. So to help you guys better comprehend, I used plowing and he used spading. So an example of the law of science would be a farmer plowing soil, and the cultivator, which is this part of a plowing machine, is made long enough to apply force to the soil in order to move it, and this cultivator is controlled by a contingency. So contingency shaped versus rule governed behaviors. Rules are often learned faster than behaviors that are shaped by contingencies that they describe. So basically, rules are easier to follow if you are driving a car and you're given actual instructions on how to operate it. So an example would be press the gear shift lever prior to putting it in reverse versus just being told to push or press the gear shift, especially if a person is not used to driving a particular model of a car. For example, the book gave the example of a BMW. Now, if one had never driven a BMW and you're, for instance, driving it for the first time and all you driven were Honda model cars, it would be very difficult to follow general instructions because of the two models of cars being different. And reasoning. So, lastly, it talked about induction and deduction being a part of reasoning, and it described induction as reasoning from part to whole. So an organism is reinforced on one or more occasions, and it is said to infer or judge that similar consequences will follow upon similar occasions. So basically, an analysis of conditions which the behavior is reinforced, not the process by which behavior is strengthened, like through reinforcement. And deduction, which is the applying or the discovery of rules. And basically what deduction is that it derives new rules from old rules. And the book gave an example of key terms such as all, some, no, if, and or. So, we have come upon the end of this presentation, and my question would be, okay, so in the chapter how I mentioned about folklore, so Skinner discussed the scientific law and how they probably emerged from the lore of craftsmen. An example of this is that a folklore described a medieval blacksmith that had to operate a bellow, and this was described in the chapter. So basically, this is a bellow, and what a bellow does is it blows air onto a fire to keep the flame burning. So instead of being given instructions on how to operate the bellow, there was a verse that helped the medieval blacksmith learn how to operate it. And this verse also helped his apprentice whom he hired. And so the verse or folklore goes as follows. Up high, down low, up quick, down slow, and that's the way to blow. So my question would be is, do you find it easier to remember how to operate different objects through folklore? Or do you find it easier to comprehend by reading instructions? And explain to me why it is easiest for you to remember steps by using the folklore or by following instructions. So basically, would it be easier for you to remember this folklore up high, down low, up quick, down slow, and that's the way to blow? Or would it be easier for you to follow the directions step by step, such as open bellow fully before closing it, step 2, open quickly, step 3, close slowly? So my question to you is, which one would better help you remember how to operate it? Folklore or by simple instructions? Thank you.